Hi class, in this video we are going to look at physical and cognitive development in infants and toddlers. So basically, physical cognitive development, it all starts with that neural connection. So, our nervous system, which are those nerves that are, they run throughout our whole body. There are millions upon millions of them within our brain, and they play a key role in our cognitive development, especially. And so our neurons are made up of an axon, a dendrite, and a synapsis. And so that synapsis is the connection to the connections that each of those neurons make with each other. And so we see developmental delays, things that would be of a neurological disorder, would mean that there's some kind of disconnect within that connection system. So basically, those neurons, they are a system. They carry their information to and from the brain, from the spine to the spine, and then just throughout our whole body. And so in those pathways being created, we also have this idea called synaptic pruning. And basically, synaptic pruning is our brains will naturally kind of clip some of those pathways that we're not using. So if you think of it like a tree, and how, a tree every spring it blooms and it grows new stuff, and then every fall and winter it dies, and some of those limbs and branches are die off. And so in the summer, to promote that new growth, what do? You have to prune those limbs, cut off all that dead stuff, right? Well, that goes on in our brain too. And at the same time, our brain has this unique property called plasticity. And basically, plasticity means that in many ways our brain, it's plastic. It means that it kind of can move around, and if of course we don't want it to move too much, right? That's why we have our craniums to help protect it. But it's like the brain can kind of move, and it can kind of shape itself. So what that really means is that our brain can repair itself. Now of course we all know that there is some brain damage. Some of those neural connections, once they get cut and lost, it's really hard for the brain to repair them. But for the most part, with this synaptic pruning of how, we use certain neural pathways more than others, was as these are new growths and these old ones are dying off, that's that plasticity that's involved there. So, you see how your brain is kind of fixing itself and always kind of retweaking itself. And, that's why a dementia and Alzheimer's is such a confounding disease, because, it seems like that plasticity just kind of gets stunted somehow. And you see, there's so much pruning going on that you're just forgetting so much, right? And eventually your brain just kind of forgets to do those basic things like breathing. And so when it comes to looking at basic principles of brain development, of course, we know that there is variety in that. There's going to be variety in cognitive functions. It's going to be variety in physical, how we grow because of our DNA, and us all and everybody being shaped differently, right? And then of course our socio emotional kind of development, and the way we go about having our personalities. There's variety in all of that, right? However, as we do have three principles that they're kind of like facts, the facts of how we go about charting development, right? And so we know that development is contingent upon neurology. So we know that it progresses in its own neurological time. So, as those neural connections are being made and the brain is growing and developing, those new things are being made, old pathways are being gone, and we know that stimulation is good for your brain. It's good for those neurons. The more you use your brain, you challenge your brain, you keep your brain active, you're keeping those pathways open, and we know that we can't prevent Alzheimer at this point in technology, but we know that we can kind of help lessen the effects by doing like brain activities to keep our brain strong. And then we know that the brain develops over a lifetime. It's up until about our mid 30s that our brain stops developing, but then our intelligence kind of changes. That's for another lecture there. So when it comes to babies, some of the first basic kind of instincts, modes of how they go about life is through how they go about, being in this world, living life is through reflexes. And most of these reflexes, they're innate, which means they're pre-programmed in us. And, rooting, sucking, and grasping are three of the first reflexes we see these automatic reflexes. And even animals have these natural reflexes. Of course, goats can't grasp, but sucking, they definitely know that. Rooting, they're aware of, they're aware of surroundings. The grasping, but we do see in other primates, they have that ability to grasp, and you see them like hold on to their mothers when they're eating and stuff. I always think that's cute. And so reflexes are pretty much our first type of sensory experiences, how we go about exploring and learning about the world around us. However, that gets replaced by operant conditioning and adaptive behaviors. Basically, the older we get, the more we have that practical real world experience of learning what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what this is, what this is. And then we learn, through our parents disciplining and educating our stuff, ourselves, right? Our younger selves. And we learn through adapting. So, by observing what other people are doing, observing our parents, observing our siblings, observing our peer groups, right? And so when it comes to these early stages of development, malnutrition, undernutrition, those are actually, major problems worldwide. And, in our last video, we talked a little bit about the bottle feeding and the breastfeeding and how, with some of those like Similac and some of those other Infamil or whatever it is that, that create those formula milk that they've done some nefarious things there. And so that's a problem. That's one of those debates in developmental psychology. And then we add to it this idea of malnutrition and undernutrition. And it's a serious factor because we see that a lot of kids in very poor developing parts of the world, they're not able to even get a chance to have a healthy development because they're lacking those key nutrition. They lack that key nutritional structure that they need. And even here in the United States, we have problems with undernutrition, to problems with poverty, problems with hunger. However, for us in the United States, we're lucky that our government is set up to where we can get assistance from them when we are, down in these lower parts socioeconomically. So we see programs like SNAP, programs like WIC, and programs like the Child and Adult Care Food Program. All of that's geared to helping ensure that all people and children get what they need. And then of course, along with that too, we have many nonprofits that are set up to help women, to help family, places like what's it called, food banks, and places like Second Harvest. That's the name. That's a really big nonprofit that helps people with food assistance, and they're really good about trying to help get people fresh food. And so one of the key things with malnutrition and undernutrition is stunning, and pretty much stunning is just that idea of you see lack of development physically, cognitively, and in all of those other areas. And it used to be really high there in Asian America and Latin America. And of course, that just has to do with kind of history, the history of colonialism, and how some of these areas and cultures have been treated. The good news is that we actually see that it's on a decline. So as we get more technologically advanced, as we get more globalized, these areas that are these we consider underdeveloped areas are beginning to kind of come into their own and improve their qualities of life. And so, in addition to reflexes being the first type of kind of sensory experiences that we have in our development, since we don't know how to speak coming out of the room, crying is one of the first ways that we learn to communicate. So, some crying is normal. It's really going to depend on kind of how attentive the parents is and just paying attention to your baby and observing your baby's behavior so that you're able to identify what that crying, what that baby is trying to communicate with you. And you hear from a lot of mothers that, they know different cries from their babies. And, guys, since I don't have any children, my only analogy is using the goats. And even as baby goats, they do have different ways that they make their sounds, and it does mean different types of things. So human babies do that stuff too. And then of course, as a parent, where crying becomes a challenge is when it becomes obsessive, right? Excessive, excuse me. Sounds like I said obsessive. Is when it becomes excessive, because that is an indication that something's not quite right. It could be something like colic, right? And so that's when you want to reach out to your pediatrician for advice and help with that. And then when it comes to crying, there's always the debate of, do you let a child cry if nothing's wrong, and and especially when it comes to things like sleeping, do you let the baby cry itself to sleep? Do you not let the baby cry itself to sleep? When is the right time to soothe that baby when it's crying? And once again, that's a debate and developmental psychology. I mean, something as obviously traumatized, scared the baby's hurt itself. You definitely want to pick it up, rock it, and soothe it. You know, Babies have bad dreams, just like adults do. And so, if baby's crying, sometimes it just needs that soothing, that skin to skin contact. It needs to just, be up against your chest, feeling your heartbeat. That's kind of that kangaroo kind of idea there. And then it also goes down to our socio emotional attachments. We create these bonds with our caregivers because it creates pro-social, or it creates and it helps promote pro-social behavior. So essentially, that rocking a baby, that holding a baby, that is contributing to healthy development, and that's creating to that brain stimulation to help with the brain development too. And then if anybody has had a newborn baby, they know that sleeping, that's one of the, very crucial, and those first few years of life, especially in those first few months of life. And, and that's why it's alarming if the baby is crying excessively, because, it's in those sleep time that a lot more of that brain and that neural development is going on, especially in infancy. And babies need more sleep when they are younger. And then, as we see, as they grow older, they start to get more adapted to kind of like our sleeping patterns, right? Normal household, you go to sleep at a certain time, you wake up to go to work, get the kids to school. You have that routine. And so as the child grows older, she starts to learn that routine. And so here is just a chart that kind of, just a visual of what we're talking about here with these sleep patterns. You know, it's always good to kind of have those visuals. And we know that when it comes to the way babies sleep, for us, we have to kind of work as adults, that is, us as adults, when, you know, to achieve REM sleep, it's kind of a process. You know, we have to kind of, our brains have to pretty much calm down and reach certain, you know, reach different levels of neural activity and brain waves before we get into REM sleep. But we know that infants, they, you know, they go to sleep and they're automatically in that dream mode state of sleep. So basically it's like they go into deep sleep automatically. And once again, I know I can hear there's some of you be like, oh no, not my baby didn't sleep at all. You know, my sisters had some babies like that. And so just remember, guys, when we talk about these things as far as development goes, we're just getting that gauge, you know, and in many ways it really is a generalization because, you know, we're trying to really understand that unhealthy development and how we can get the most, the earliest intervention there so that we can help everybody, you know, live, not necessarily normal, not normal, but normal in the sense of, you know, function so that we can all function together and find our creative gifts that we all have as individuals. So, you know, our environments and in our younger years is crucial to, you know, how we turn out as adults. Now that doesn't mean you can blame everything on your parents in your younger years, because you know we get to a point in our lives where we get to make the choice in our behaviors, right, guys? And as sleep problems affect us as adults, like I said, not all babies are going to follow that perfect pattern of sleeping exactly how they're supposed to. We can definitely see sleep problems with children, and you know, especially once we get into like toddlerdom and like middle childhood, and usually by about adolescence, a lot of sleep problems. You know, things like nightmares, being afraid of the dark, and maybe even things like narcolepsy. You know, we just kind of fall asleep suddenly. Little kids are kind of good at doing that, right? And they tend to go away in adolescence. And then, you know, once again, if they're not, that indicates something deeper, more psychological going on there. And, you know, once again, that environment is very crucial to healthy development. That's something that the humanist psychologists, especially people like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers especially, talks about a lot. So basically on this slide, it's just, once again, visual representation. So we're looking at those different brain waves and, you know, looking at those different brain waves and just noting just those waves of babies. And so, you know, once again, the time that babies spend in that REM sleep, and you see, once again, I mean, almost instantly, you see those spikes of that. And then, you know, to kind of go back to this idea of this crying, you know, do you let the baby cry? Do you not let the baby cry? Since, you know, in those early stages of life, crying is the only way that we can communicate because we haven't learned language yet. It really is a big debate. You know, it just seems like, once again, you just kind of have to be observant of your baby's behavior and kind of, you know, create an environment that hopefully isn't stressing the baby out so that is going to cry excessively. Because, you know, there's sometimes that if you don't want that crying to be reinforced, because this comes into, oh, oops, hold on. Because that goes into things like attachments and the ways that we form bonds with each other, and you know, that there can be unhealthy aspects involved to that if you kind of, you know, coddle that baby. If every time the baby cries you're picking it up and holding it, that's going to create a kind of insecure type personality. So, you know, you want to, so once again, it's going to be a touch and go kind of thing that you just are going to have to figure out on your own. But you want to be the baby to be, you want to be able to be attentive to the baby when it does need your attention, but at the same time, you want to teach the baby a little bit of independence too. So self-soothing, not necessarily a bad thing, because it does kind of it does create trust. And if you've already built that environment of unconditional love, of being observant, sensitive to how your baby is behaving, what it's trying to communicate to you, then you're building trust. So sometimes, so that letting the baby cry and soothe itself is not always going to be a negative experience for that child. And it's and in doing that, it's always better to kind of gradually work into that. That's what I was talking about with the gentle, sensitive routine. So don't overthink it. And most, I would say that in for the most part, that you figure it out. Figure it out. And then when it comes to looking at this idea of like letting the baby self-soothe, letting the baby cry, sleep is a factor in that too, because sometimes if the baby is crying, you're going to pick it up, bring it to bed with you, and let it sleep with you, right? So that's another part of this debate of crying in developmental psychology, has to do with co-sleeping. And we see, depending on if we have an individualistic culture like our American culture, or if we have a collective culture like, say, more tribal cultures, or even more cultures that are more family oriented, like maybe like certain Asian cultures, certain Hispanic type cultures, they would be considered more collectivist. And so, in those type of cultures, they think co-sleeping is it's good for infant development. And whereas in our individualistic culture, once again, it goes back to this attachment idea. And if you're going to create a child that is insecure or more secure in life. And then when we get into Freud and psychoanalysis, with he thought that co-sleeping kind of led to unhealthy development. When we get into looking at his psychosexual stages of development, you see that he gets to a point to where he thinks in our younger development, we develop, as boys, we get Oedipus complex, and as girls, you get penis envy. And it's pretty much like you kind of grow more attached to the parent of the opposite sex, or the parent that you feel more strongly towards. And it's not necessarily that at that age we understand what sex is and love or anything like that. We just kind of have this mindset of, you see your parents kissing and stuff, and maybe you're a girl, and so your dad is nicer to you. It gets kind of crazy. But my point with it is that in a nutshell, he just thought that by co-sleeping together, it will create unhealthy development, because it's going to create these unhealthy sexual kind of ideations. The way you view your parents, and then that in turn is going to affect the way that you go out and kind of engage others there. And when it really comes down to research on whether co-sleeping is good or not good, we're really inconclusive on that from the scientific side of it. And once again, that person environment fit is important. It just means that having that healthy environment set up already, and figuring out what works best for you and your family is really the best case scenario. And then they find out that kind of mixing it up, sometimes kids sleep with you, sometimes the kids doesn't sleep with you, which seems to probably be, I would say, what most people do end up doing. And then when it comes to sleep, our next big debate with the whole crying and sleeping is sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. And basically, this is where you put the baby to sleep, healthy, and then something happens in the middle of the night, and the baby ends up dead. A big and they don't really know what causes it. I mean, they used to think that laying the baby on their chest, so that caused it, because it was kind of suffocating. And that's not really the case. And they think that it might really be something that has to do with something with those neural connections not developing right in the brain to begin with. And it's actually probably um, one of the biggest causes of infant death worldwide, even more so than like malnutrition. And like I said, we see there that smothering idea is, that the baby smothers somehow asphyxiates in its sleep. And I remember as a little kid, we always, little sisters in the 70s and 80s, you always put them on their belly, right? And so, in order to try to help navigate and prevent SIDS, we see some campaigns of encouraging healthy sleeping habits. Some of those campaigns, they actually give you diagrams, show you how your baby should, sleep, so that, you're making sure that you're avoiding SIDS in all ways possible. And then we also have, different types of bedding that come about, like this little portable sleeping basket you see there. All right, so that leads us to sensory and motor development. And so, when it comes to our senses developing and expanding more, we do see that infants, they are able to see. That's something that gets more. It gets more intense for them, as in, they're able to kind of see more clear and see more as they get older. But it seems like as infants, we like to look at things that we're used to looking at, and then, that attraction to novelty. Babies like kind of bright, shiny things that get their attention. Um, Babies do seem to have a preference and recognition of faces. They, of course, recognize their mother, and it seems like attractive people. However you want to know what attractive is, babies seem to prefer them more. And then we see that about 8 months, babies kind of start developing a fear when they see differences, and they that seems to kind of slow down within a month, so about 9 months. We also know that babies about 8 months, they develop depth perception, and so this is about when crawling begins, and we know that from the visual cliff demonstration. I believe I have a actual clip of the video footage of that in class that shows them, demonstrates them doing this experiment. So basically, as you can see, they set this box up and they put a glass top, so the baby's not really going to fall off that cliff there. There's an invisible top, but that's glass, so you can walk across it and the baby would be okay. And there are actually some babies that did walk onto that side. But for the most part, we understood, and we learned that babies understand, depth. And coming upon a scenario like this, they had some understanding of, that's too far for me to get down, and if I do, I'll get hurt. And then when it comes to our other senses like hearing, smell, taste, of course, reflexes, a lot of that is going to is going to involve touch. But these other senses here, we do know that in the womb, babies can understand different people. So they basically, when they come out of the womb, they recognize their mother's voices, maybe even possibly like fathers and other people that have been in the environment while the baby was in the womb. We do know that they have a sense of smell and they have a sense of taste. So, there's something tastes bad, they're going to see that emotion of disgust. If something tastes good, you probably see a little spark of happiness and things of that nature. All right. And then when it comes to motor development, remember, guys, we have those sequences where we go top to bottom, kind of big to small, and you go from large to being more refined. That we definitely see a spike in our physical bodies during these early years of or these early months, stages of our life. And then, as you can see with our motor milestone here, a lot, those milestones are dependent upon how the body and brain are developing, and it's all about, those muscles just getting stronger in many ways. We've already said that, so we know those growth principles that are affecting that. And then, just once again, that caution of that, there's going to be variability in that motor development. And typically, early development doesn't really indicate some kind of advanced intelligence later in life. And so when it comes to motor and growth development, especially once babies get to that stage of crawling, it's important that it's important to baby proof the environment, because you want to create that safe environment and that healthy environment, right? And then when it goes to cognition, we're going to learn a little bit more about Piaget and his stages and our socio-emotional development. But basically, when it comes to cognition, the way we think, the way we learn to think, which then affects, things like the way we speak, the way we learn language, the way we learn in general. Piaget gave us 4 stages, and in our first 2 years of life, we go through what he calls the sensory motory stages. And this is when we start to, get that understanding of the world going around us, that depth perception, that sound discrimination, taste discrimination. And this is when, we start to get that kind of symbolic thinking. So basically, it's just saying we start to, kind of have an understanding of what's going around us in the world. So we show signs of cognition, okay? And so a lot of times at this stage of development, since we're just learning, we see a lot of that repetitive action at 1 to 4 months. And, it's kind of that babies kind of do the same thing. Maybe they, just shake the rattle. And then by about 4 months, you see them kind of wanting to explore a little more. And then, of course, by the time they get to be able to walk, they start exploring even more. So that's all related to their cognitive development, which of course is related to that physical development too. And so, since babies can't talk, how do we know that they think? How do we know that they are employing reasoning skills and trying to figure out the world around us? Observation, right? Simply by observing and tracking their behavior. So we have this means in behavior. And basically, what that means is that, you can see with babies when they're exploring, when they understand something, like in that picture, you see the baby is sucking on its toes, it's finally starting. It probably doesn't really understand what toes are, but it's starting to understand this is another part of its body. This is here, exploring how it tastes. And then, about 1 year of age, that's when, babies start to get to the point that they understand enough that if they want something, they go after it. And that's really the key, that there's something going on up here. And then this idea of object permanence. And that's when, that's our understanding that if something goes out of sight, doesn't necessarily mean that it disappears. See, when we're early on in our development as babies, like with peekaboo, for the first few months of doing that with the baby actually is thinking you're disappearing when you go behind your hands. It doesn't have that understanding that just because there's something now covering your face, that you're still there. And so with object permanence, it's when we begin to understand that, okay, the train goes in the tunnel, it doesn't disappear, it's going to come out the other side. Your face is going to reappear behind your hands. Simple enough, right? And so when it comes to Piaget, he gets a lot of criticism because, even though his work was instrumental in helping us learn a lot about infant and toddler development, he actually didn't do a lot of science. You'll see, like I said in class, I have videos of them doing these experiments in the lab. But for Piaget, he was just working with his kids, and a lot of it was just play. is just presented as play, was just observing them play. And so he really was a big proponent of that healthy development, to learn what's going on in life, that play was key to that. And then when it comes down to it, we have this idea that infant cognition that in many ways we have this idea that sorry guys, my neighbor shooting a gun. That's what happens when you live out in the country. That he might have underestimated how just really smart babies can, and kind of underestimated that physical development. And we understand that that's something that happens gradually. And so this is kind of the idea of object permanence there that I was talking about. So we see that at 5 months, babies, they don't understand that the rabbit is going to that stuffed rabbit is going to reappear on the other side of the wall, right? But in many ways, by one, they're starting to get a better understanding of things. So, like with the hat rabbit coming out of the hat, they kind of have an idea that the rabbit was in the hat all along. And then when it comes to cognition development, we have information processing approach. And pretty much that's just about, when you divide thinking into steps and processes, kind of like with the computer, there are different buttons you have to push. There's a process to get your computer to start up. It's very much the same in helping, our brains to start learning. And then we just see a picture here of a little boy who is, kids days. He's actually, it looks like he's got a remote control, but I'd say, nowadays, it's astonishing that at younger and younger ages, children are, they know how to use iPads and and other computer equipment. And so, once again, that's probably something Piaget would have said, no, that's too complicated for them to learn something like that. So, it has something to do with the way information being processed, and once again it's going to come about to the environment that the child is in, I would think. And then when it comes to cognition, we also see that there is some babies have evidence of social awareness. So we know that babies can make judgments about motivations, they can kind of understand intent. And we see this after this is pictures from a video that they show, and the tiger's not being very nice, the dog's being very friendly, and after seeing it, even under 6 months, the babies prefer the not well. Sorry, I said it wrong. The tiger's being nice, the dog's being mean, and so they prefer the nice one over the mean one. And then our end of infancy, where we start, reaching, when we know we have come to the end of infancy and we are ready to move on to the next stage of development, is when we actually master language. And so, language and when and how a baby is going to go about learning and mastering it, once again, guys, it's going to be contingent on the environment. That would be the nurture side of it. It's going to be dependent upon the nature side of it. So there is some genetics involved. And then it's an individual thing, and just kind of maybe how motivated that child is to go about learning language. And, once again, some babies talk very quickly and very young, and then sometimes it takes some children a little bit longer. And so when it comes to language development, elasticity is an important concept, and that just the fact that our language is kind of fluid, it's kind of stretchable, the fact that we can enunciate, pronounce things, sorry. And it's strategic, there's a structure, we have, syntax to the way there's a flow and a syntax and a structure to the way we go about speaking. And babies, they pick up on that. Of course, that's one of those observational things. Whatever um, culture you live in and whatever language you speak, that baby is eventually going to pick up on it, unless there's some developmental delay there. And so when it comes to the theories on language, we see Skinner thought that it was learned through reinforcement. So by constantly, if you want your baby to say mama, then you constantly say mama, say mama, say mama. And then Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, he just thought that language acquisition it was naturally built into us. And so because of that, we're kind of pre-programmed to want to speak. And so it kind of just gets easier for us the more, the kind of the more we develop there. And then we have the social interactionist, is that, crying doesn't really always get you what you want. And so you're motivated by our social nature, because we're social creatures and we want to communicate with each other and we need to communicate with each other. Crying eventually turns into sounds, because that's how you're going to be able to communicate your needs better. And so just what we see here is just a little chart that notes those language characteristics and how we go about acquiring language. So of course we know crying turns into kind of cooing and oohing and gooing and sounds that turns into the babbling. And then we see those one words, or just kind of just the syllable, like with ja, like I just, and then as a parent, you understand that means I want juice, the child's trying to say juice. And then, of course, it then starts by about 1 years of age, you start to get that kind of more complex speech. And you get that me juice, me want juice. And you just refine that as a child gets older to learn to speak that properly, I guess is a good way to say that. And so we do see that by talking to the babies constantly, that helps the baby to learn and acquire and want to speak more. And then we also see that the more you do that, the more we see that the NaptoGenesis, basically what that means is you see more of those neural pathways getting stronger and stronger, and that gray matter concentration is growing. And that's a good thing, because that gray matter, there's a lot of stuff going on in there that's good for our brain. So we need that. And, that is important to our cognitive development. So, all right, guys, that ends our lecture on cognitive and physical development. If you need anything in class, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thanks, guys. Bye.